This is the Lydia and Spin with Tim Dahl and special guest Simon Slater for this intro, which is on the cusp of the fall of Donald Trump, episode number 69.
Oh yeah, and I am so fucking hungover, and basically because I'm justifying it as me just
pulling a Hunter Biden.
Well, I wish I had that privilege, because if I did, I would be making fucking. What he made it make a week or a month? It was like really insane. Not the point.
The point is you're really hungover.
I miss touring, and so I'm in a little tour zone, which is like the day didn't end, the night didn't end. But it's also because of the, frankly, anxiety of this whole fucking thing. I mean,
what, Tim? I have no
anxiety
about it. Well, let me say this. First of all, I'm not only enjoying quarantine, I love chaos. Now, I'll quote myself, quoting somebody else, and I love this line. I think it was E.M. Ciron. Chaos is the score upon which reality is written. And once you accept that, as well as accepting that most of this fucking country and the world are absolute fucking morons, your stress level goes way down.
I talked to Yusuf Lateef as a student and bass player with him when I was younger about chaos theory, and he just likes to think about these things as like extremely complex or systems. Basically, that's it. It's just can you interpret them properly?
Well, I'll quote another great quote I love, which is what I tell all my worrisome friends. It's David Mamet.
Oh, I like this.
Worry is the interest on a debt you may not incur.
Absolutely, and that's about being present. It's kind of amazing because the industrialized white world is so good at engineering and planning, even if it fails. And so when they go to when they go to these like vacations to the quote unquote third world, and every day is a celebration of dance and food and stuff, like I need to bring this into my life. Well, guess what? It's just like being a fucking professional musician, because disaster is 1 millimeter away, and so you better be fucking dancing and enjoying your fucking self, because you don't know what's happening tomorrow. So you can't really appropriate that unless you're living it. But
I'm just, I did have the mantra I can't repeat because it didn't come true. Black vet, amputee, sniper. But I have a new one. Orange fucker in an orange jumpsuit. Because once Trump loses, I can't wait for the he already has 300 count them lawsuits against him. Southern District of New York is chomping at the bit. And you know what? He may have pardoned a lot of his friends. He's not going to be able to pardon himself because there is no fucking excuse for his behavior. Now he's stomping and crying like a little brat. I want to recount. Well, you know what? It's a fraud. It would have been a fraud if you, first of all, won. And second of all, if you put that idiot in charge of the post office, who, by the way, 300,000 unaccounted for ballots. And you know what? That wouldn't have helped Trump because mostly Democrats voted in advance.
This of course, is the funniest story that hasn't been really talked about, is what happened with the post office, because it's such a bumbling, idiotic scheme. This postmaster general's really incredibly dumb guy.
DeJoy. And it's just typical of so many of Trump's scams that fail. You put this idiot in charge of the post office, and it was a federal judge that said a few days ago, if there is one unaccounted for ballot, well, now there's 300,000. He's going to go down as well, DeJoy. DeJoy will not be having too much joy wearing orange next to his good fucking buddy.
So, for the listener, this is the Wednesday after the election, so maybe this will be obsolete when you hear it. I wasn't so confident in this final assessment, but I think Biden's going to win. It shouldn't be this close. And let's talk about the Democratic Party. I mean, give the people one thing, and you win.
A good candidate, motherfucker. Well,
even besides that, universal health care, debt relief. You fucking win. And even if it's not possible, Guess what? How Trump won? Delusional lies initially.
Lies.
Building the wall. It doesn't matter if you can't do it. Say it.
Trump won the Rust Belt because there was a hatred for Democrats since Clinton and NAFTA. That the Clintons basically abandoned the Rust Belt workers, and so they bought into Trump's story about that he was going to save them. And the reason Trump lost Wisconsin and Detroit was he did nothing. And this should be a lesson. This should be a lesson to the Democrats. They got one chance to get this right. Otherwise, they're going to lose them again in 4 years.
Okay, I have to cut in and say there is one thing that Trump succeeded in. Oh, he built his wall around the fucking White House. He constructed a whole wall around the White House.
Huge one.
I mean, 9 miles on the Mexican border that was new.
He didn't do it. The Secret Service did.
You can't even fucking do it. Look, there's the Rio Grande, there's mountains. It's impossible. It's an idiotic claim, as all of his claims were.
Well,
he
that's
built a
very
wall.
symbolic.
It's around him.
If you're afraid of your own fucking people, that says a lot.
You know what? I mean, they built the wall around the White House. Now they should brick it up.
I'm going to go back to the criticism of the Democratic Party because
Weak.
You lose 200,000 plus people are dead. You have unemployment through the roof. It should be a landslide. Fucking losers. And this is where the Trump fucking campaign failed. 3 reasons in Arizona. First of all, that sadist fucking sheriff, prison guy that he fucking pardoned, that basically was putting like poor people in like these 126 degree fucking brick fucking buildings, like piece of shit, right? Of course, the other thing was John McCain's a hero in fucking Arizona, calling him a loser, and then Cindy McCain, I think that's her name, endorsed fucking Biden.
Well, and also, how many insults does this idiot have to call against? First, it's the Muslims, then it's the Mexicans, then it's everybody that's not him. And the thing is this, and then he's sucking on a fucking Goya bean.
The Mexican kids, first generation Mexican kids in Arizona, I've only seen some footage when they're canvassing. I'm generalizing, very humble and extraordinarily forgiving and gentle people here. And they were organized and they were just like, guess what? Fuck you.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, Arizona was a state that still didn't celebrate Martin Luther King Day. In my views, living on the East Coast, it's like this is like the most racist, fucked up state. But amazingly, it's so earnest in their obsession with capitalism that, in the obsession with capitalism, you want constant growth. So by having constant growth, they actually had to allow immigration in. And there's now a huge Mexican population there. And guess what, Donald Trump? That bitch slapped your fucking ass.
Look, the other thing is this. I don't care if it's Sleepy Joe or Donnie the Dummy. The issue is this. Most politicians suck. The system is corrupt. And this is the bottom line. If this is the only industrialized nation that cannot supply because, forget the military industrial complex, there's the insurance industrial complex and the hospital and the big pharma, that this is the only industrialized country that does not allow access to health care and will bankrupt people who don't have it. I mean, this is a basic human right that every other country, not
it would be a landslide, Lydia, if that's what the Democrats
well, yeah, I'm
ran
thinking,
on. And they
hang
won't.
on, I'm
so
thinking,
insane.
just a minute, I'm thinking Kanye got 60,000 votes. He's going to run in 2024. I'm not going to run against Kanye. I'm going to fucking run him over. Yo, just saying.
Whoever gets the White House, and I think it's going to be Biden,
hey.
is inheriting a disaster right now.
You know what? This country has
God.
been, this country, I'm sorry to say, no, I'm not, get paid to say it, not on this podcast, of course. This country has been a fucking disaster since its inception. Murdering, religious persecution when it claims to be here for religious freedom. You know what? Religious freedom means you're free from all religion. That's my religious freedom. You know, stealing, lying, thieving, murdering, exporting war, all but for 10 fucking years. That's this country. Get used to it. I got out for a while. You know what? People are, oh, if Trump wins, I'm going to leave the country. I want to leave the fucking planet right about now, all right? Because enough said.
boy.
I'll go to Uranus first, Tim, and see if I like it there.
Is Uranus a gas planet or is it like a
Hey.
solid rock?
By the way,
planet?
I think I sent you. NASA has been recording the sounds of Saturn and Jupiter, and they're pretty creepy. Psychoambient sounds.
I mean,
You know, I love NASA because eventually I need to move soon. Saturn, maybe. I'll start with Uranus.
Lydia, what do you think about all the? Well, sure, we can go there. But what do you think
Jim,
about?
okay, I'm going to hold you to that. Go ahead.
Wow. What do you think about the? I think it's like 6-figure volunteers that want to go to Mars, and it's like 2 years to get there. Like,
you know what?
What's up with those people? I mean, just
Well,
like, please take me to Mars. Guess
look,
what? You're not coming back. I mean,
hey, come on. Hang on. There's so many barely inhabitable places on this planet that you can die by going to, and it's going to get worse soon. That half of this planet is going to be like Mars or Saturn or Jupiter or Venus or the fucking sun. So just hang on for a little while. This planet, by the way, has so much incredible, mysterious landscapes. And you know, being somebody that likes to go underwater, there's so much here that's still unexplored that is so magnificent. Go to Mars, you fucking assholes, because you know what? We don't need you here. It doesn't. You got that much money to burn. Look, I'm not saying I wouldn't like to go a little bit higher up. I always try to get higher, but you know what?
well, the Vikings 1,000 years ago. I mean, fucking rowing. I mean, they hit North America. I mean, rowing across the northern Atlantic. I mean, and most of them fucking didn't make it, but some
They
did.
tried. They tried.
Well, what's so funny? Unlike the Pilgrims, they showed up. I think as parts of Nova Scotia or something. They're like, you know what? I'm not so into it. They went back. All right. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't want to double down too far.
You don't want to jinx it.
Without the Senate, I mean, this is a disaster. I mean,
why do you bother to underestimate the stupidity of the human race? I mean, it saves me so much achita. It saves me a lot of achita. In the meantime, you know, Sleepy Joe, Donnie the Dumbo, who's ever there and who's ever, I mean, it existentially, morally, psychically, psychologically, and insults our intelligence. But most of us listening to this, we've tried to create our own universe. And that's what you gotta fucking do. Because if you're out there in this reality, which is not reality, which is corporate klepto bullshit, and the domination of as many other people as possible, selling as many weapons as possible, incarcerating. Oh, by the way, Oregon just is decriminalizing heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, small amounts. I don't know what that's.
They also voted for mushrooms. I don't know what the outcome was. I remember that was on the ballot.
Well, you know, I think that we need less musicians and more scientists to make better drugs for everybody. That's
By
just
the
my
way,
opinion.
Lydia, Bob Burt's psych because New Jersey, I think, just legalized marijuana.
Well, look,
weed heads are psych.
Marijuana is psychotic at this point, and Godspeed to anybody who does it.
That's what's so insane. I mean, in my late teens, early 20s, I was much more into marijuana than I was into alcohol. But no, the new shit is like, whoa. I mean, it's really strong.
You know, whatever gets you through the night. And that's all I'm saying.
No judgment, just an observation.
Hey.
I just can't believe motherfuckers are fucking, and some of my closest friends function every day on that fucking new grade of marijuana.
Tim, they don't believe what you do either because they wouldn't be able to keep up. So, I mean, really, right now, the reason our next guest, Martin Rev of the band Suicide, is our special guest tonight is because I thought, well, some people actually might be considering suicide, the act, if this election went down the wrong way.
It's funny you bring that up because I have a few side stories that are a little fun here. Michelle, quote unquote, Shelley Weissman, 56, was killed in Vegas the other day. For whatever fucking reason, she was riding her bike and on the bike lane somewhere in Las Vegas, I don't know specifically where, and some psycho, I don't know, decided to do a prank and go out the window and shove her off her bike. Well, guess what? It killed her. Little did that guy's prank make any kind of reasonable calculation, because guess what? When he did that,
killed him.
His head hit a fucking light post, and he fucking just absolutely killed him instantly. And of course, the driver kept on driving. The detectives investigating it, Raymond Spencer, his quote was, "It was an absolutely senseless act. There was no reason behind this other than complete stupidity."
That pretty much sums up the last 4 years in this country.
I'm thinking they're on drugs, but of course the driver, when he was pulled over, he ran away, drove off, and they finally found him. And what's his name? Something Cruz. He said, "I kept on driving because I'm on probation and I don't want to get caught."
All right. On a cheerier note, what about the two gals that were kayaking and whale watching, and a humpback put them all, kayak and all, in his mouth, and then just spat him out?
Well, I mean, I know about humpback whales. I've been to countless whale watches, not even voluntarily. And I've seen humpbacks breaching. I mean, they're one of the most active, as a voyeur, one of the most active whale species if you're going to a whale watch. And they have the baleen that filters out the plankton. They're not carnivores. I mean, they eat like micro shrimp, so they're not carnivores like, I'm going to wolf down this mammal. It fucked up. I mean, that's what it came down. It didn't know where it was. And I mean, wrong place, wrong time, kayakers. I mean, that's just not.
Hey, they lived.
Of course they did. Of course they did. So this is where, not to go directly back in politics, but Florida
Not
fucked
really.
up.
But go ahead.
Florida fucked up, but this is where there's a little good news for Florida. A huge population of incarcerated people in Florida were receiving the
right to vote.
The federal bailout money, the $600 a week, and of course, Florida fucking attorney general is like, "You haven't suffered enough. We want this money back. You guys are horrible." Some lawyer took it on as a class action and fucking went against the fucking or the attorney general and was like, "No, they do deserve it," and they won.
And you know what?
You won.
You did the crime. You served the time. It's done. That's it. It's the way it should be.
These are inmates who got the.
Oh, inmates were getting it.
Well, you know what?
Their commissary is full.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Instead of getting 14 cents an hour for making fucking license plates or cell phones or robocalling people,
mass incarceration is unethical. And so basically, I don't care. And that's a Scandinavian approach. It's basically like, at some point when you give a tax break, the 2018 tax break, to billionaires, that just makes them just so much richer, and the collateral damage of that is kind of insane. I mean, that takes a lot of years of studying of what the collateral damage of people being absurdly rich in society to sustain that is brutal. Oh, you gave $600 a week to a bunch of fucking prisoners. Oh, you guys are the worst. How dare you take it? So I'm glad they fucking won it. Like, fuck you.
Look, there's no solving any of the extremely ridiculous problems this country has, and most of the planet still, in 2020. Shit doesn't work as it should. There are simple solutions. Nobody's following them because the corporate kleptos are still puppeteering everything. I'm really done with politics at this moment right now, Tim. Wrap it up. Any more fucking jovial stories? I really need to get off.
Martin Rev, who's our guest, and Martin Rev is a cool motherfucker. He's in the band Suicide. If you don't know them, check them out. You should know about them. And I'm happy that he's our guest this week. I like him genuinely.
First friends I had in New York were the band Suicide. I was doing the Suicide tribute in Europe with Mark Hurtado. Amazing. We do, Retrovirus does Frankie Teardrop. I have a deep connection to Martin Rev. This is Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, episode 69. We're here with Martin Rev. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl and our very special guest, one of my first concerts in New York, first friends, Martin Rev, notorious for one of the most influential bands ever out of New York, Suicide. Hi, Marty.
Hey, Lydia.
So Martin, Lydia, I've been in her band for a while, and she always says how you and Alan were some of the first people to kind of help Lydia out when she first moved to New York City as a teenage girl.
Well, they were the first people to not run away from me.
Well, I remember it well. I remember when you came in, of course, and you were wonderful.
Do you remember giving me niacin shots until I flushed and got hot?
Yeah, maybe I gave you liquid niacin. That I didn't remember. But
I wish it would have been liquid opium or morphine, but yeah, you gave me what you had.
It could have been, but it wasn't.
So with niacin shots, they kind of give you a little boost or something. I mean, is that
They do.
Oh, and you still.
This was actually you can't get this anymore. I was getting it without a prescription. It was high quantity niacin with vitamin C and maybe one other B, and it came in a liquid form. And
it was a good drug. Good drug.
No, it was good. I went on tour with it, and I would take that every night before going out. That's that combined with a couple of other things. The other things I was using before that, but this was just like the next stage.
Was that a one tour? Elvis Costello, The Clash, and Suicide? Is that the whole or different? Okay, what year was that?
That was 78. We had put out the first album. It came out around the end of 77. Europe bought it soon after. Then they arranged a tour for the summer of 78. They asked around. Elvis said, okay, let him open. It was opening up first for Elvis Costello for a month. He was winding up a world tour on the continent, but he's winding it up on the continent, but he had been on tour for 9 months by then.
God.
If you remember those days. And they still exist, I'm sure, or they have. And then the Clash actually requested us. They had heard the record. And then we did a month with them, which was in totally banned venues because they couldn't play, as popular as they were, they couldn't play in regular venues anymore after the last tour before that. Too many riots, too much destruction. So they had to play in like airport hangars, military gymnasiums, school gymnasiums, things like this. So then we did a month with them, and then we did about 2 weeks of our own gigs in the UK, Scotland, and whatnot.
How was the Clash audience? Because punk rockers, they often are pretty. They want what they want. How did they treat you? I mean, I know you had trouble with other groups. How was the Clash tour? Let's start with that.
The Clash was basically a riot or an incredibly provocative provocation and meeting with the populace every night. And what it did was it built up. We started, it was just a UK tour. So we flew in from the continent with Elvis, maybe the next day or one day off. And then we went right into the UK. I think we did a London show first, maybe. Then started going further and further north through the Midlands, Highlands, And each one was getting heavier and crazier. In those days, the audience looked as punk or more punk than the bands. They had mohawks, and they were young, man. They were younger. They were 12 years old. They'd be lining. You go to set up, and they were, you got to the venue, and already in the afternoon, they were on line with armbands and mohawks. So they were giving back what they felt had been taught them by the bands. And every night it was crazy. Alan was getting it like, he was going crazy a little bit too because he was constantly being covered. The spit, and in those days there weren't really regulations about throwing things. They threw everything. The climax of the tour was really, and everybody was saying this too, eventually we're gonna get to Dublin. Dublin at that time was, they said it was basically one of the poorest city in the world.
In the world.
in the world. I remember driving in. We drove into the hotel, which was somewhere on like a dirt. I mean, it was probably a major hotel, but it was like you get there, all the roads and dirt roads. And right in front of us, I heard like a ting ting, tangle, tingle, clangle. And there was a guy in a peddler. This is on the main street too, and he's selling. He's driving a cart, a horse-drawn cart with peddling. Who knows silverware and this and that.
They were called rag and bone men. That's what the name of those
Right.
rag and bone men, those
Right.
peddlers.
And he said exactly, and they said their biggest crop, well, not their crop, but their biggest consuming good, biggest the food that is consumed the most there is sugar, raw sugar. So now that was, it was prepped for us, advanced. The guys on the stage guys are, they said, oh, wait, this is it. So we got there. It was an old Loewy's Theater, actually. I've asked sometimes if it's still there. I don't think it is. A tremendously high stage, beautiful. I don't think I saw the audience once. I just heard them. The brogue, you might say, the richness of the spirit that was coming off was so. I was just playing off of that for the whole set. I mean, I started hearing bagpipes. What I was doing, didn't have to think about it. It was just like, wow, that shit was thick. And when we got off stage, there was so much debris on stage, including, besides the bottles, and they used to throw coins a lot in all these places, but coins can hurt you.
Yo, big time.
Yeah. But there was actually a Tommyhawk, a hatchet.
What?
Stuck in the bass drum riser. That was set up maybe for the Clash or before us, whatever it was. Yeah, we had 3 groups a lot of times. We did a lot of these with the Specials, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah. Ska band, right?
What a bizarre bill, but that's because
Specials opened up, we went next, and it got heavier and heavier because the Clash audience, of course, they were there for them and they loved them, but they gave them the same,
How long were your sets when you're opening for the Clash? 20 minutes, 40 minutes?
I would say not longer.
Yeah.
30 to 40.
Yeah.
And of course, some of them were cut short, like with Elvis Costello, they were total riots where we had to get off. And then, and then the bouncers came to us in the dressing room and said, we all got to get out of here. And Marty Fowler actually came back and says, we got to get out of here now through a side door because the place is totally disrupting in riots. And they were pulling, it was a new auditorium. I remember this once in The Hague where we played. Elvis had some nice venues, but they tore them. They were tearing the acoustic tiles, which must have been not more than a few months old, right off the walls. So as we left, you saw like bouncers with full Nelson guys in there, like full Nelsons in one hand and fighting on another, or two and like half Nelsons or something. So it was, with Elvis, it was one after the other. I mean, we played Paris early on with him, and it was like that everywhere.
Did Alan thrive on this? I mean, you're talking about the rioting, the pulling down of tiles, the bottles being thrown and coins and tomahawks. It wasn't out of love this was happening. It was because you're opening for Elvis Costello. What the hell? Mm-hmm. So did Alan thrive? I mean, he did thrive on confrontation. I mean, how did that feel for both of you night after night? Were you just like...
This was confrontation a little beyond what was expected because we had expectations for a few years, of course, like many do in many bands. When we get to Europe, finally, we're going to be accepted. That feeling, I know what's happening here, but Europe, the place for artists will be accepted. So the first night we played a solo gig, actually, to put us on a label in Metz, France. And Metz had what was called a science fiction festival.
That's appropriate.
But this was this was an intellectual Frank Herbert, all these writers, filmmakers giving lectures, so that was our introduction. And in Metz, we got on stage. It was a very small room with hardly a stage at all, maybe half a foot. All of a sudden, this fucking throwing things, going, it got up to where Alan would usually get off before me anyway, because that's the way we did even musically, and then I'd keep going. So he got off at some point, and it was starting to be mayhem. And then I felt at one point a woof in my chest. It didn't bother me at all, but I looked down. Somebody took off their boot. And they were very close to us. This wasn't like a regular venue at a far away. They were all like sitting around on the floor. They were about as close as we feel we're close now. And that was the beginning. And then we went right to the tour. We flew to Paris, stayed over one night, and then the next day, I think it was the the Grand Theater in Paris. And the thing is, they were in the middle of soccer games, and they decided they couldn't do the show at regular time because there was a game that night, and they put us on in the afternoon. And the fans were already riled up from, I guess, soccer too, the whole week, and they totally flipped out. So from there, we got in the car. And I don't know if you remember Charles Ball. Lydia certainly does.
Of course I do.
Charles Ball was assigned to us as our driver and road manager by Marty Rev.
A disaster in itself.
But Marty didn't see it coming. So, but he was great. That was our first meeting. I didn't even know Charles before. Marty said, "I got him, Charles Ball. Was that okay? We're going to use him for a roadie."
You should have hired some Hell's Angels.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, that would have been appropriate, and everything would have been a lot easier.
Would have been appropriate, and we didn't know this. So Alan was getting worse, and every night. I mean, he was covered when he got off stage with gob, and we got to it was called Blackburn, I believe, in Crawley, in the UK. Now we were playing a school auditorium during a sound check. So I see they're building something, the crews. They were building chicken wire protection going up from the floor to about 12 feet or more off the stage.
Good idea. Yeah.
And then while we're testing, there's a contingent comes in, like looking like sisters, nuns, little black briefcases, and they probably were. They were the medical team. They marched into a little side office, like usually with a janitor or the school teacher has his private office. March them in on the side. That's just for the sound check. So when we did the gig, they were incredible. One guy got over that chicken wire in about 30 seconds. Was right on stage, maybe a second, third number. It gave Alan or right cross or whatever, right in his forehead.
Whoa.
So Alan is now bleeding on the forehead. They help him off. I mean, he could get off, but I think he was told, "Hey, listen, they took him off into that side room, like probably
with the nuns."
Yeah.
You should have had the nuns on stage.
Should have had the nuns on stage. So that's what it was every night, and getting worse and worse all the way up to Glasgow, which is one of the last shows.
Oh, that's a rough town.
Rough, UK. the height of the golden age of punk, man. That was so Alan was, hey, he was a little nerve-wracking, we might say, for him.
Okay, so did you learn your lesson about not going on tour with pop rock? Or no, not yet. Really, you didn't, because didn't you also tour with the Cars? I mean, Rick Ocasek produced your second album, but did you also tour with the Cars?
Yeah, and
you didn't learn your lesson.
The Cars fans were they just as aggressive as the Clash and
Cars fans were just as much or more, especially because the Cars was such a total successful group at that point, but pop.
Right.
And not that most of the Clash at that point even heard of us too, but those Cars fans, not at all. So who they're expecting to open up, which they're going to give it usually, as you know, to the opener anyway, to an extent. Unless you win them over. We're not the kind of band that's going to win them over. We got out, but the thing is, now we're in 2 civic centers. We play 2 civic centers with 15,000 people each.
Wow.
And when I walked out to do the sound check, I looked out into those seats in that fucking stadium, right? Excuse my language. And I said, how am I going to do this, man? It was so, compared to what I knew was. So we got out and play immediately. Boo, boo, boo.
Well, booze are better than bottles, I guess.
Booze were great. At that point, you're right, Lydia, because remind me, at that point, they had a restriction, at least in the Civic Center. You couldn't, everybody had either a plastic cup, well, that was in the clubs by this time, or they couldn't drink in those seats. So they didn't have bottles, thankfully. But the booze, I loved in a way because the sound of like 15,000 people booing at one time.
Well, you're doing something right when that many people hate you. You absolutely are convinced you are right, I imagine, and they are wrong.
Right away.
I mean,
yeah.
There's a thing though, I with pop bands where, it's a double-edged sword, or they kill two birds with one stone, where they get a more esoteric, maybe more eccentric band that gives them both street cred or art cred, right. and then they also put them up there to basically be attacked because their fans are just like loyal just to this one band and hate all other bands. It's like a weird thing, right?
Well, I don't know why the Cars didn't just hire you for the after party. That would have been amazing. Same amount of money, less antagonism, do your show. Perfect. Instead of aggravating you with, well, you liked the sound of 15,000 people booing. I understand.
Great chorus, more than any great choral symphonist could have ever hoped to get in his mind, or even if he had his work performed.
Let's go. Yes.
Well, did Rick Ocasek come up to you afterwards, after you're being just completely booed by a sports arena size crowd, and say, "Hey, man, I don't know.
Great job, great job."
We had our own dressing room. The Civic Center, you get like this dressing room you'll ever get again. You never had before. A big, nice, clean room with a big men's room in there. Men, not just two people. And so after us, Rick knew we had already played with Rick with the Cars. We did the Universal Amphitheater in LA. And that was the same thing. The amphitheater was 5,000. And that's what somebody also took off their shoe that we found on stage.
And if these are what your friends do for you, imagine the enemies. Well,
Cars were one of our greatest fans. They loved us.
Excuse me. You have to answer this question, because to me, this is one of the biggest mysteries surrounding suicide. Bruce Springsteen. Okay. And also the fact that, look, Nebraska is totally inspired by one of his best albums. It's totally inspired by suicide. What, did he hear you playing in a studio? What's that story exactly, how he comes to record Dream Baby Dream?
Well, the first time we met Springsteen.
Were you a fan?
Oh, yeah. No, we were recording our second album. Rick was the producer. And we were doing it at Power Station. Remember Power Station?
Oh, yeah, classic. There's a band named after the Power Station.
You must have felt like you were hitting the big time there, kid.
Well, we had just signed what comparison was like a major deal with who, Michael Zilka of Z Records. And Michael was looking for a producer, and Rick had already expressed a few times that he really liked the producers. So he did produce Dream Baby Dream, and Marty called him about that and asked him if he wanted to, and he jumped on it. And then he jumped on doing his second album. We were in Power Station, and as you know, Carly Simon was recording her album while we were there. And also, the disco guy was so successful at that time.
Tim? Giorgio Moroder? I don't know.
I don't know, just, but he had like a residence there.
Disco is not my forte.
He was Casey and the Sunshine Band?
All right, doesn't matter.
Look it up.
How did Bruce come into it?
So Bruce was recording his album. I think it was after Carly left, and Rick thought we had everything, the tracks down, and Rick was like going over the production, trying to figure it out. he had the idea to go next door and ask Bruce, do you want to hear the master takes of these guys are all close to it? Bruce must have already heard of us, I guess, but I don't know. But he came in right away and he listened to the whole album.
Oh, amazing.
He stood up in the control booth behind the glass window, and Rick played him the whole thing. So that was my introduction, because he spoke, I think, a little bit to Alan, and he came over to me. I was sitting behind the control booth, just waiting it out, you know, I mean, and he came over and said, man, I really like what you guys do. I just got to tell you. So after that, I don't know. Then you started hearing stuff in the press. Yeah, Nebraska came out, I guess, after that.
How long did it take you to record your second album?
Second album was definitely longer than the first. Not that
Sure,
much.
because Michael Zilka was paying for it.
He was paying for it, and it was a whole different.
And he was trying to get you to have a disco hit.
That's the thing, you know, Michael. That was his mom.
Did you have the power station like engineer? Was it Bob Clearmountain? Did you have all those power station guys working on it, or did you guys bring in your own team to that studio?
Ironically, you remind me, we had Larry Alexander, who was our engineer for the first record up in Nyack, New York, which was ironically too Bruce's first studio. We recorded Born to Run, apparently, a 16-track analog, of course. So Marty knew of it. He had been living in Nyack at some point. He booked us in there. And now he's got Larry Alexander, who was introduced us to, as the engineer. Well, apparently Larry went a little crazy too, because when Marty took over Craig Leon was the first producer, and then he had to leave for a very important another production. And we were in the middle of the record, and Marty came to us and said, what do you guys think if I produce the record? I mean, I said, I've never produced a record before, but what do you think? I think I'm going to do it. Is that okay with you guys? Yeah, go ahead, Marty. Oh, you know, we'll all do it anyway. You know, the next session, Marty's pushing everything, but he had a great method, you know, just soloed every track and pushed it to the maximum one at a time. And then when he put them all together again, it was like this incredibly choral, beautiful event.
Immense.
That many tracks. So apparently Larry was going a little stir crazy, because that's not what you do with an engineer. He's pushing everything into the red. Marty didn't have any of that suavite, you might say, professional ethic for him. So when we get to Power Station, it was just ironic that now they said, engineer, his name is Larry Alexander. He just happened to get a gig at Power Station.
Oh, wow.
And,
But and how long did it take? That was the original question.
Right, you're right. Absolutely. Thank you. It took, I don't know, I think the tracks took maybe 5 days, you know, because
Yeah, well, you had the songs, so of course you have the songs. You've been playing them
there.
Yeah,
I was writing parts. See, Rick, not to belabor it too much, but Rick said to me before the session, now that I'm producing, he says, by the way, there are a lot of new instruments out there now. What would you like? Because he knew Michael would get anything, right? So these new drum machines and this new keyboard, Prophet 5 and whatnot.
You got the Lin drum, is that what you use, or the?
Well, he offered that too, but I said, no, we'll go with this other one, CR88.
Yeah.
The Lin was the one that was, you know, the prominent one at that time, as you know. So I said, okay, that sounds good, Rick. Give me this, and this, you know, like a kid in a candy store. And when I got to the studio, everything was there, the Prophet and the CR, basically, 88. So I started doing the tracks. Well, I was finding one thing after another, because the Prophet was so fresh at that point.
Yeah.
The Roland too. And I was matching them up, you know, finding beats and finding stuff on the keyboards. Every sound was like beautiful and different. I was just going through each one. So I started laying stuff down. Most of the tracks.
And there you're creating on the spot because you got all the new toys. So did doing the Z record and getting off the stage from the Cars and pop music and Elvis Costello and punk rock, when did you actually start to get your own audience? Was that with the help of Z Records promotion, or just you stood out long enough and there's enough weirdos out there eventually? for us.
It took, well, it hasn't been a complete success that way, of course, even up to now, but it's just good.
Hello.
I mean, you know,
Yeah, I do.
I've been working solo for several years.
Mhm.
And while that's, you know, I mean, people now know you when they come out a lot of times, so they're not being hit over, you know, sideways.
Well, it helps when you go on your own tour and don't open for an
Exactly.
inappropriate
Exactly.
act.
And that's what Suicide started doing, started touring on their own in the 80s. And Michael's promotion didn't do it.
Look, all the promotion in the world often doesn't do it.
Michael did the best he could and would have, I guess, but it wasn't our time. Like I say, when we put out, well, it was after he put out the record. We were still going out, and then we stopped for a little while.
Well, and again, going to Europe, because where the hell was there to play in this country other than Max's Kansas City or occasionally?
So, Martin, I mean, basically, you're talking about Elvis Costello and the Clash and all these rowdy audiences, but the common denominator here is Suicide's playing all these shows, and then when you're playing on your own in CBGBs, it sounds like you're being, it's getting pretty crazy too. So,
CBGBs, yeah, we had those audiences quite a bit, not as extreme because
smaller, I
New
guess.
York, but they were coming in. We were playing weekends. We started out playing during the week, but we do like 3-4 nights opening for the Ramones, and then we did 4 nights with Blondie.
That was a real good combination.
Yeah. So
not really.
So I mean, by now the press was starting to attach a bit onto this new thing going on, and people were coming in to see this new thing with punk, but they were coming in from like Jersey. You know, it was a Bridge and Tunnel crowd on the weekends, as you know. So it wasn't great, and but I was banned for another reason for a while from Hilly's.
Well, what is that? I want the reason.
That reason, right?
As I asked you, but you didn't hear me. Was it something to do with you in the bathroom? Because they tried to kick me out of the bathroom numerous times.
Did they? No, this
forget.
had to do
Never worked. Never worked.
This had to do, and it wasn't Hilly. Do you remember Merv?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
the bouncer.
So you know all about it. But
well, I don't know about the incident, but I mean, we can talk about something else if you want.
No problem. I have
then spill the beans.
I have no shame about this at all. But yeah, it was a simple thing. They in the afternoons for a while. They decided to open up. Well, they were open anyway, but nobody would ever go, as you know.
Well, it stunk like dog shit. Who even wanted to go any? The only reason you went at night is because it smelled like everybody else.
Yeah, there was nothing. It was the worst place to hang out. It was the least comfortable, the most real. Max's was the most artificial, but man, you could sit around and enjoy with a restaurant and booths and carpets and bars. So they had people going in the afternoon. They had a pool table in the back, between the stage and the dressing room. And a lot of guys, musicians would go in and, just find themselves playing pool. When they knew that was available, after a week or two, we were playing here and there, and Merv got an ordinance idea one moment, said, you have to buy a drink if you're going to be.
Oh.
You see? And don't give me any orders like that, because even if I'm a stone alcoholic, now I'm not going to buy one. So I didn't buy one. I told,
and you got banned for not putting another $2 into Hilly's pocket.
Exactly. And that was a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, look, this is the question that nobody can seem to answer. And I was underage. People were young. Nobody had money. We got into all those clubs without ever paying. We were out every night without paying. Why did they let us in? Max's even. First time I walk up to the door at Max's, I maybe 17. I'm like, I need to get in. They're like, all right. Well, then again, I was cute.
They could feel, plus the people at the doors, I don't know if you remember Mark, big, giant guy. He ended up being in Alan's band a few years later, guitar player. They had people at the door who were not, who were close to a scene or who would have been if they weren't just square.
I don't remember when or where, but I know that Weasel Walter sent me a flyer with Suicide and Teenage Jesus playing, and maybe it was the Village Gate. I don't remember.
Well, we did do the gate a couple of times. That was pretty early. I don't remember if it was both of us together. I think I would remember that.
Well, what's interesting to me is as
Fun.
as Suicide was one of my biggest influences because of the psychodrama, the romance worked its way into my music occasionally. I was thrilled to be able recently to do this whole Suicide tribute and Alan Vega tribute show in Europe with Mark Hurtado, who, as you know, filmed a lot of stuff with you and Alan. And it was so great to just pay homage to that. And also with Retrovirus with Tim and Weasel Walter. I mean, I've been doing Frankie Teardrop, which I think if anybody could do it besides Alan, it has to be me. And I suggest anybody go online and look at my version of Harlem in Europe with Mark Hurtado. But it was such a thrill to me to do that music, and I'm so grateful that you allowed it. And I'm also so happy to have, done the intro for your book. And I remember the last time we've done some festivals together, but when you were on tour with Big Sexy Noise, and I love this, and the last thing you said to the boys in the band were, "Take care of my little doll," like I was still 17.
That's what I said. I knew I said, "Oh, Lydia, you can't fool me. You've always been a doll."
Well, however you want to put it, Big Daddy, I love it. I want to go back to before even Max's. I want to go back to you and Alan started doing music. Alan was doing his artwork. What the hell were both of you doing before that? So Alan's making his new neon sculptures. What are you doing? Are you going to the loft, the jazz lofts, or
were you a professional
doing?
musician? Were you a professional musician? I mean, were you doing non-art music gigs?
I was a musician since I was. My first gig was when I was 15, and I had been playing seriously since I started when I was 8. But I've been playing.
But what were you playing then? What were you playing then?
Well, I started out doing some rhythm and blues gigs.
On what instrument?
Piano, right?
Or keyboard.
Keyboards.
Keyboard.
Farfisa, or before that you were?
This is all acoustic.
Yeah.
Before electronics, I was, that was my basic orientation, was using keyboard or piano, you might say. And then by the time I met Alan, at that point, I had a couple of years before felt and realized for myself that what was happening in jazz at that time was so not only relevant, but it took such a knowledge and an awareness, such a challenge technically to master it.
Who were some of the, out or in jazz people that you liked at that point? I'm not necessarily that they might have influenced you, but who were you listening to at that point when, before you were involved in Suicide even?
Right. No, my first almost like mentor, because I was so young too, and he was almost like a father image, was Monk.
Oh, yeah.
And
He's
when
my
I saw
favorite
him-
jazz musician.
Huh?
I think he's my favorite jazz musician. If I had to pick one, I think it would be Monk.
Not a bad preference at all. But and I used to see him. Here's another thing about getting into clubs free. I used to get into the Vanguard free all the time because at some point I knew people. I mean, Max Gordon, who owned it, knew me, and then the people at the door knew me. And I had been, whatever reason, I would just go downstairs and get in. They didn't bother to charge me.
Let
So
us
I would see
in.
Monk down there 4 times a year or so, and everybody else. Miles's band a couple of times a year. But Monk was the first, this was like, wow.
Took
As it
hold
was
of
for
you.
many people.
Took hold.
And then,
He took hold of you.
he took hold of me, man. I said, that's hip. That's what it's about. And many people, other people did too. I wasn't the only one. So, but as far as playing, I wasn't going to try to. I could eventually. I could play in that. I could do like a very sincere playing like Monk, but I knew that wasn't Monk. You don't really imitate because it's too obvious. It's just like it doesn't leave it open to just be a.
Also, I don't feel like, every time someone tries to cover Thelonious Monk, only Thelonious Monk can play Thelonious Monk. It seems,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. Unimitable, you might say.
But
Imitatable.
you had the vision to give your vision a sound. And that's what I always say about music. It's like, if you don't have a vision, don't give it a fucking sound because I don't want to hear it. It's just the same as everything else. And you invented this sound that nobody can piggyback off it because it might have inspired a lot of people, but nobody sounds like that because they can't. So you had a vision and you gave it a sound, and it was outside of jazz, it was outside of rock, it was before industrial, and it was just something that was so raw, sexy, violent, psychotic, not psychedelic. But then also, one of the most interesting things about Suicide to me is, besides all of that, there was this romance. There was this almost doo-wop. There was this just romantic thing going on as well, alongside the psychosis, which made it highly, just completely outrageously unique.
So how did you? So you're getting into jazz. You're doing all this stuff. How did you meet Alan?
I was doing, at that point, I had my own group that I was playing with wherever I could, whenever I could. It was called the Reverend B. Reverend B, off of my last name. And at that point, it was a free improvisation group, which sometimes I would be using an electronic keyboard because there wasn't any other also available. And that was opening up things for me. It would go anywhere from 4 to 5 to 8 musicians all together, and we'd play. So it goes back to the Museum of Living Artists. I had seen the flyer for that, that it was a place now, a happening place for certain guys, and on that scene, on the avant-garde jazz scene, were doing shows up there. Not a lot. I mean, nobody was doing a lot of anything, but. And I saw a Museum for Living Artists. I kept it in mind. And then, a very good friend at that time of my wife's at that time, may she be blessed. I met her in the street one time late at night. Sometimes I just walked from like 6 to the east side and back at night in the village. And I remember it was like a winter night. There was nobody else on the street. She comes up to me and she says, "Hey man," he said, you got a child now. I had just had a son. And she said, "You got to get some work." She said, "Okay, I know this guy. Call me up next week. I'm going to call you next week." She called me. She knew this. He turned out to be a prince, a Saudi Arabian prince, son of a prince or something. Anyway, they were doing things every night at the museum, political rallies, all kinds of controversy.
What year is this, Marty?
This is 68.
Whoa.
I'm sorry, 69.
Okay.
You should have married the prince.
What's that?
You should have married the prince.
Yeah. Well, it was a male prince, but that doesn't matter.
I'm sorry. I was only 9 years old at the time.
Oh, I remember you, and you were adorable, and you were like you are now, but you were like great. We obviously felt you felt that way because we just hung out. When I heard you, you were so.
I was sassy.
Sassy, yeah. And then when you showed me your poetry a little later, showed me some things you had been writing, I saw it right away. I didn't have to think twice. That she's got that special thing.
Whatever it is I had, it scared most other people, but not you. Thank you very much.
I want to go back to the Saudi prince because you still haven't told me how you met Alan. You got yeah.
Finish that.
It turns out that. So Yvonne, her name was, bless her too. She called me a couple of days later. She said, "Okay, so and so, I forget his name, the prince. And he's very radical. He says he's very radical, but it turns out he's a Saudi prince. At some point, when they found that out, they didn't know how to trust him. Every night in the museum, they would show like revolutionary pictures, Middle East, take over this, anti-Zionist, this. Every night was another revolutionary. Plus, they had the Art Workers Coalition, revolutionary artists. Carl Andre used to be part of groups and this. So she said, "Call this guy. He's having a film thing next week, and he'd be interested. You could play with him." Imagine she went that far. Not that we're going to make any money. I think I'd make $20, $25 at the most.
Yeah, that was pretty good in '68. Come on.
That was very good.
It was like 200.
Yeah. So I called him up, certainly. I put my band together, the Reverend B. We'd already done maybe 4 or 5 shows wherever we could get them. And we played. Great. During about a week or so later, I'm walking the streets again in the winter downtown. This is on Waverly Place off of like 7th Street. right off of Astor, near Mercer. And somebody called me and said, we can set you up with for your band, an audition. Or maybe I called somebody, I said, call this person. It was London Records, had a little studio office right around the corner on Mercer Street going west, which I had never known about, like in an office building. So I said, okay, I called him up. He said, yeah, we'll set you up with an audition. Of course, you know, incredibly impractical, of course, for me, but for us. So I went up, we did the audition, and not surprisingly, they was very polite. All right, you know.
See you
we'll get
later.
back to you.
Yeah, see you
No way,
later.
London was going to. So I come out, all the other guys go away, go home. I'm walking around. I'm not anxious to go anywhere. Kind of cold, but I love walking around the city. And I go around the corner. I said, well, let me stop up at the museum. Now I know about it. I've been there once, just to get out of this and see what's happening. So surprisingly, I go into the office elevator is open. I mean, it's about 7, 8 o'clock. Usually lock them, as you know. And I go up and I start hearing some sound, feedback, this and that. So I open the elevator. I see 2 people. You know, one guy has a guitar. He's just playing noise guitar, like Future DNA and everything. You know?
Skronk, early skronk.
Yeah. And Alan, who I didn't know yet, I see him with his head. He had a Wallen sack tape recorder, if you remember those 2-track Wallen sacks, which were a big thing then for, you know, modern cutting edge technology. He was on the floor with his head inside, just at the speakers, twisting some dials or whatever, just trying to hear the stuff that was, he's just getting feedback and putting his head in it. So I kind of checked it out, and I went back into a back room. It was like still kind of a raw space, but fairly finished. And I found some industrial springs, you know, like these metal stuff, you know, things that. So I brought those back, and I came and I just sat and listened and watched them, and I started drumming to it. I said, here's, you know, this is, I'm going to take it. Let's take it in this. Let me take it.
You were playing like an industrial slinky you're beating on.
Yeah, there you go. So after that, we got to know each other a little bit. And then it ended up getting another party thing, not with Prince, maybe a month later. Alan, I was playing electronic because I had to borrow organs and whatnot too. And it's changing the whole sound. It was like free jazz with electronics. And Alan was there. He talks about it sometimes in interviews, how it blew his mind and all this stuff. I mean, we had 2 drummers and this and that, but I loved it. But to me, it was, you know, it was blowing my mind. I don't give a shit. You know, I didn't know. At the end, we played a couple of sets. Alan was playing tambourine with us. Got up, he took his tambourine. He was just, and I said to him after, I think we had probably maybe talked a little bit in between once in a while at the museum, not much, if anything. I said, you and I are going to make music together. Because I think what I knew realistically for me was Alan was the only one staying up that late after everybody went home, still into his shit. And that's what I was doing because I had no other place to go, and it's totally into mine. I mean, I had a place to go if I wanted to, but I didn't have to go that soon. I didn't have to be home anywhere.
Did Alan come right out the gate with his style? Like you're gonna start doing something.
No.
You're going from your, you know, kind of jazz thing into something new. And what is Alan bringing the first time you start doing stuff? Doo-wopping or what? What was he doing?
No, he wasn't doing. He had not sung at all.
Okay, well, when he started putting the vocals to your stuff,
Right.
what was like the first thing he started with? Was it doo-wopping? Was it
That took
howling?
a couple of years. Yeah,
okay,
no, because
screaming?
Alan started screaming,
Poetry, yeah.
No.
Well,
See,
he
Alan
was good at.
took a mic. He took an old guitar. He took a trumpet. He was into at that time. I don't know if you know, like Albert Eiler's brother.
Of course.
That kind of playing, right? He'd heard it. He didn't know. He never played that stuff before, but he had so much energy. He was just playing that fucking high-end energy jazz free trumpet. And then he'd have a mic in his hand, and then the guitarist was still there just playing noise. And he didn't really know what to do first. Well, we just want to do it all. He was just doing it all.
And
Like
this is the early 70s now. Is this the early 70s, late 60s?
This is the end of 70, beginning of 71.
Yeah. And I mean, nobody is doing this kind of noisy, dissident, insane stuff. I mean, even though out jazz was nowhere near this. Albert Eiler, perhaps, but still,
it's its own thing. Yeah.
This is so far out of all of that, and so
I felt that I had cycled through all the periods of jazz for myself and really worked like crazy to master them for myself. And I went through from bebop all the way through the avant-garde to where I was doing some show I could play like Cecil. I mean, I'm just trying to say like Cecil, but in that world.
You know, Alan has said before that it saw the Stooges in like '69. And that period of the Stooges was just the pinnacle that rock has never reached again. And very rarely. I don't know why. And I can kind of see the influence, but in an almost not a direct way, because Iggy was so intense, Alan took it somewhere else. And the music was also somewhere else. I mean, the Stooges were the definitive depiction of rock to the nth degree. And it had the psychosis and it had the sexiness. And then here comes suicide. Yeah. And there we go.
We did a show together, just to let you know, a few years ago in the UK. We were invited to open up, and we do our first albums.
And I bet the audience fucking loved it.
Oh, it was at the
All's Tomorrow's Parties, or no?
Yes, exactly. That's who invited us. And it was at that old, was it an H? I forget. You know, these things, that big ballroom that we played in the 70s, that was still there.
I kind of have a similar trajectory in terms of my own exploration with jazz and finding yourself. You're finding yourselves together, and it's kind of, you guys are evolving as a unit together as you're kind of finding what your sound's going to be. Was the fashion already there? Because you guys also have a look to you guys. And was that like, did that kind of evolve with the actual music, or you guys kind of had a look from the get-go?
A look of total thuggery, and it was very sexy.
Well, thank you. I'll accept that anytime. But Alan, I would say Alan, in a way, had a look when I met him, more of a real heavy, great 60s, 70s rock look. He wore a big round leather hat. He wore a big cross around his neck. And he'd wear sometimes a leather jacket, but nothing so biker at all, but just like a hippie, but with, you know, not totally deposed to being one. But he looked great. You know, I had what I had before, which is just me. But then we started doing some shows.
You just wore yourself, Marty. You just wore yourself.
Were your sunglasses, was Miles Davis's 70s look an influence on that, or you kind of independently? Not at all. Okay.
I noticed, like these two, I noticed when I see pictures, he started wearing them after.
Have you wore them?
Wow, yeah, and I empathize with it totally.
Was Miles' drug use or sexual abuse an inspiration to you at all? I mean, I know it inspired me.
Not at all. I was inspired because the time which I came up, this was already before a little bit of my time. But the hippest music then in jazz, besides Coltrane and Monk, was Miles. But this was Miles of the quintet with Coltrane.
The first quintet.
And then the second quintet was a little more my time. I actually got to know, thankfully, to the graciousness of himself, I feel, but Tony Williams.
Oh, did you ever play with Tony Williams?
I played once with him, not in a show.
Wow. And he was a kid at the time, right? I mean, he was really fucking young.
He started with them when he was 17.
Yeah.
And I heard those records maybe by the time he was 18 or 19. I was maybe 2 years younger than he, or 3. And yeah, you'd hear those records and you didn't even know yet what you're gonna do. You're still like looking up, practicing, and trying to get to. And then this is several years later. This was like 10 or more years later, I had the opportunity to, we got to know each other, and he invited me down to a session. But in any case, especially the quintet with Train, I mean, certainly the one after was, worth listening to, of course, like it is now. But that one,
Marty, I have to jump in here. So, of course, Monk, Miles, this kind of really the regal jazz greats, Cecil
Right.
Taylor. Now you're playing at Max's Kansas City and CBGB's. I hated most of those fucking bands. I don't like punk rock. I didn't like Blondie. I thought they were hilarious. I liked the band Manster. I don't know if you remember them. Did you like any of the bands you played with, or did you just think, you know what? When are you going to do something new? And that's what was so great about Suicide, Teenage Jesus, Mars, one of my favorite no wave bands. So many of the bands that might have inspired me for 1 minute, they were just too traditional. Bob Quine. For me, that was the lick. Did you like any of those bands?
That was the avant-garde coming. That was the new, But we were already playing what we played before we even got into Max's for a few years when there wasn't any place to play.
You were playing with the New York Dolls.
Well, we were playing at the Mercer Arts Center.
Okay.
Correct? Our own shows.
Okay, and the Dolls were playing there too, but not with you.
Because you had the Mercer was like 5, 6 theaters, and sometimes it'd be all going at one time, and different. This was like the glam rock period.
I love glam rock.
All the guys wearing high shoes and polka dots.
I ran away for the New York Dolls at 13. Went back, came back again.
Well, I can see why. I mean, the doll. Every show the Dolls had was so colorful. I mean, the guys were all dressed, the girls. I mean, it was all like this was the elite of the time.
I have to say, I respect a man that can look good as a woman. Not everybody can. Not everybody can pull it off, honey.
It's better than looking bad as a woman. If you're gonna do it, you might as well look good. Sometimes you look better as a woman, as we know when we go outside and see some of those incredible looking.
Well, I'm not going to ask you when the last time you slipped into a pair of woman's panties, but that's not even it's not really a drag question. It's more like, it's more like, what are you doing later tonight? I'm just saying anyway, it's just frisky as always.
More apropos question.
Martin, my band Child Abuse played with Open for Suicide 20 years ago, or 13 years ago in Greenpoint, and then also with you solo a couple times. And I remember it's kind of a non sequitur, but I remember after the gig you said, "Oh, I got to go home. Felicity is on the TV, the WB TV show for 14-year-olds." Was that a joke, or did you actually watch that show?
I could see it was me because there's a period of maybe a month or two where I got caught into this, watching her for some reason. And because NYU and right around here I am, and just one of those crazy things but I would never usually run home to see anything on TV. Alan had a few programs that he loved, soap operas in the afternoon.
Whoa!
And he'd leave tours. He'd say, I'd usually stay on a tour an extra week or two if I could, just to hang out, relax. Alan was, I have to get home tomorrow. My soap is on.
Whoa!
And so he did that for many years. But I could see that Felicity thing probably, yeah. And it's strange that I would even, with Greenpoint, maybe that was the night it was raining like crazy. It was like
maybe I think it was 13 years ago.
Twice.
Okay, maybe it wasn't the raining night. If I remember, it wasn't raining. Actually,
First one.
It was the first one. Yeah.
Marty, how have you been handling quarantine? I know that I've been loving it, but how are you handling it? Do you care?
Overall, I realized right away, as soon as they started talking about it, I've been quarantined.
That's what I thought. Yeah, exactly.
It's no different. Because I'm working on my shit all day anyway. I can go out when I want, but I ain't going to spend that much time outside because I ain't going to be making nothing.
Well, you know what? I don't know. I'm sorry, but I don't know any man that doesn't look better than when he's wearing a mask. No, I'm not saying what kind of mask, but I think a man looks pretty good in a mask. And
I don't know. There is something about the first time I saw a woman later in New York when I took a late walk, and she in the summer, and she had shorts, very high thigh shorts, and she had a mask. And it hit me like, oh, because you don't see that. It's almost like, yeah, there is some suggestive kinds of flavors for things that come off of something like that.
I prefer a full head mask, or even men in burqas, I think would not be a bad idea with a shield over it. I'm all for keeping safe.
Didn't the work covering up anyway? I think that's why.
Well, didn't the health minister of Canada, she said, people should wear masks during sex. And a lot of people were like, okay.
Well, excuse me.
Twist my arm.
Excuse me. Wear a mask. I adopt totally different personalities. The mask is the least of my costume, honey. Please, let's take it to the next dimension.
Yeah. Well, I just don't want it to get to if you remember THX 36 or something, that film.
Oh, is that the George Lucas? No, that's something else.
Yeah, one of them. Yeah, when they both the lovers are in individual bubbles. And they can't even, I think they can't even touch, but they put them, they observe them, each one in like a separate net kind of enclosure.
Well, if you hearken back to your younger days, I mean, most men of a certain age weren't touching the object of their pornographic desire. They were looking at it in a magazine or on a video screen and satisfying themselves. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just can't even, I'm just in my own fantasy imagination. I love the idea of men having those kind of thoughts about me, and there's plenty of pictures out there.
Oh, it's inevitable, especially teenage guys. What teenage guys didn't steal a couple of magazines?
Exactly. Yeah, you know what? You're never too old to jerk off to the Lydian spin. That's what I say. We're running out of time.
If you have the energy and you want to do it, you don't have any partner or you have a partner, hey, there's no age limit on that.
There's no age limit on sex unless you want to come into my bedroom. With that, I'm going to have to let Martin Rev, who created some of the sexiest, most psychotic, I'd say romantic because I'm weird, intense, visionary music of the last 50 years and has inspired a lot of us in many different ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Martin Rev.
It's always great to see you.
One of my first friends and great inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Martin. I really appreciate it.